Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings here with Jason Ounpraseuth. As always, we are here today, and we are talking about. I should have wore black. This is like a navy blue. I'm wearing a Tottenham t-shirt. I should have wore black because we're talking about the end of the WWE Network. And so, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about kind of like what we enjoyed about the network, what the network was like when it first arrived, and then kind of get into this transition over to Peacock, what we can expect in the future, because it really is an industry changer on a lot of different levels. It's going to change the way that we as wrestling fans watch wrestling. It's going to change the way that WWE makes money off of wrestling, and potentially how other promotions could make money off of wrestling. In this ever growing content war that all these streaming services are in. So, I guess to start, Jason, let's go back to 2014. And well, actually, let's go back before 2014. Let's go back to like 2010 or 2011 because that is when I feel like I first started hearing the rumblings about a WWE network. And at the time, I believe the idea was that they were going to have like a channel, kind of like the NFL Network or NBA TV or the MLB Network or these all these other like kind of sports brands have like a cable channel that you turn to, and it just has wrestling all the time on it. And that's when they would maybe air like old pay-per-views and that kind of thing. It was kind of pre this over the top streaming service boom that we saw now, but. What was like your original impression of the WWE Network when you first started hearing about it? I mean, were you aware about like the like kind of pre streaming service concept? Were you following it at that time?
Um, I was vaguely aware of it. I was just starting to really get in all like the dirt sheets and reading wrestling
Mhm.
websites and all the reports about it. But yeah, like it was kind of interesting because like I'm sort of looking back on it, I was reading reports about how WWE they're having issues with their network and like like negotiations that were going so well, and like I guess that W channel thing was sort of a leverage point for WWE to use against their parent network at the time. And so it's kind of interesting to look back on that. I don't know, Jesse, you're a lot more in tune with that than I am. So like, were you aware? How much were you aware of that during that time?
Well, I remember I think I should have probably looked up the timeline for this. I would say I said 2010. It might have been more like 2011, 2012. But they were talking about a WWE Network, and at the time, like I said, NFL Network had been around for a while. NBA TV had been around for a while. I believe the MLB Network or MLB TV was, um, just kind of getting off the ground. They were a little behind the game, but it was like it seemed natural that WWE would have like, oh, I would change to channel 590, and it's WWE, and they'd be showing old pay-per-views, and they'd be showing reruns of Raw or SmackDown, and I believe that they even I remember this. I remember like watching Raw, and they would say like, "We have a network coming," and they even like I believe they taped Legends House, which was like kind of their first original program that they had on the
Hmm.
network. I believe they taped that like a year or two before it aired because they had taped it and were basically like, "Oh, this is what we're gonna have on the network, original programming. We already taped these 8 episodes or whatever of the Iron Sheik and Tony Atlas living together and Gene Okerlund." And so I remember that, and then it almost became like a punchline about like, oh yeah, the WWE Network, it's on its way because it kept getting delayed. They had advertised it and they never talked about it again. I don't recall like it being used as leverage when it comes to their TV negotiations. I'd have to look at the timeline, but that does make sense for why it kind of like got like rumored about and then didn't exist. And then when they came out with this OTT service, it was a total game changer. I mean, to go back even further, like you and I are in the cream. We're in a good spot because we didn't spend decades and decades like
Hmm.
tape trading and building a tape library. Like people who are a generation or two older than us. But even as a kid, I remember, if you wanted to watch wrestling that wasn't on, there wasn't like live active wrestling, you basically had to YouTube. There wasn't a lot of stuff on YouTube, and
Hmm.
you couldn't find just full matches on YouTube. You could occasionally, but even WWE themselves was not doing a ton of stuff on YouTube. But you would have to go and buy DVDs.
Hmm.
You could torrent stuff too. I wasn't like as like a 12-year-old wasn't like technologically advanced enough to have like the torrenting ability. And I also believe I had dial-up internet still at the time when I was 12. So uh, I wasn't really like gung ho on torrenting, but basically what you had to do was I would go to um, Newberry Comics, which people in not in the Boston area will not know, but Newberry Comics or FYE or Best Buy or anything like that, but mainly Newberry Comics because they had a lot of used sections, and they would have like a huge these DVD stuff, and they would have the previous DVD releases. They'd have Best of the Undertaker, Best of Eddie Guerrero, History of the WWE Championship. I still have most of them filed away somewhere. But that's how like you would watch old wrestling, and that's how like I first watched the Attitude Era, and how I first watched the Hulkamania era, or anything to do with WCW or the NWA or anything. You had to buy these DVDs, and I would save birthday money, and I'd go and I'd buy them, and it was a labor of love. And then the network came out and everything was on. Everything was there. You just didn't need to do that anymore, and it was just a complete game changer. And especially for older people who spent decades building this gigantic tape library, and they had all the Coliseum VHS tapes and whatever. It was a totally changed the way I think people were able to watch old wrestling. Uh, what was your kind of first reaction, I guess, when you're like, oh, I can now watch everything on demand?
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, or also like, I remember going to the Blockbuster and,
Mm-hmm.
looking up the old DVDs, seeing which ones they had, whichever new DVD they had. I always
Yeah.
remember going through there. And even pay-per-views, pay-per-views, you're expensive. AEW still keeps that pay-per-view model, but still, WWE had a lot more pay-per-views you had to buy if you want to watch. And, that was really the model to really get you. They had to convince you to fork over 60, 70, $80 a pay-per-view. Honestly, W Network, at the time it was revolution. Like, you can have all the pay-per-views for $9.99 a month, and that was what the big marketing ploy was you just pay for everything for one-time payment a month, and it was mind-blowing when it came out. And that's why I bought the network right away, because yeah, I don't want to pay the full price for WrestleMania. And I remember I was reading about this as well with DirecTV. They were pretty angry about the W Network because that was cutting into their business, which obviously, yeah. And eventually, that pay-per-view business died out for WWE. But yeah, it was pretty revolutionary. It was really excited, just for that, at least. And it's a selling point for the next couple of years after that in 2014, where like, hey, you want WrestleMania? Just pay $9.99, and it. And so yeah, it was pretty cool at the time to really all that in at a very cheap price.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge point. It totally changed the way we feel about. I mean, we can get really into like how it's totally changed everything about the pay per view model, from how they book cards on the pay per view to who they push onto pay per views, and it's totally changed the booking aspect of wrestling as well. But yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, like I think like the number one thing my dad could be the maddest about would be like some sort of charge coming up on his cable bill. So even my parents like didn't like hate wrestling or anything like that, but they weren't like, oh yeah, we'll pay
Yeah.
$50 for Jesse to watch this wrestling pay per view. And I was a kid, so I didn't have any purchasing power of my own. And so I remember like not being able to watch the pay per views, and I had limited access to the internet at the time. So like I was like even like into 2006, 2007, like if I wanted to see what would happen at a pay per view, like I'd have to turn on Raw the next day and watch, which I know a lot of people had been on the internet by that point. I wasn't like at that point, but like yeah, like I think I pre network I think I got like two or three pay per views like properly, and that was because and they were like when I was already like a teenager and I already had a job, and I was like, I'm gonna pay you $50 now so I can watch Royal Rumble, and that was pretty much it. Like I was never gonna be able to watch pay per view events at home. It just like wasn't something my parents were gonna spend money on. And now obviously it's like even when I was a kid, I could have saved $10 a month and paid for a network subscription. I know they sell like they probably don't anymore, but they sold like gift cards that you could like
Yeah.
$50. Yeah, Netflix,
Hmm.
WWE Network subscription. I still when I really got into wrestling like seriously, probably when I was like 14 or so, when I started really having an interest in like old wrestling, because I didn't really care about old wrestling when I was like 10. Like I was like, yeah, John Cena. Then that's pretty much
Hmm.
like the extent of. I didn't care about like watching like the 1998 Royal Rumble or anything like that. Uh, but when I was like 14, still pre-network, I didn't. I finally like started wanting to watch them, and I people might not remember this, but you used to be able to get a Netflix. You could get DVDs sent to you, like physical DVDs sent to you through the mail. I actually still have that service. I think I'm the last person in America that still gets it, but I still get the DVD sent to me through the mail. Um, Now everyone knows Netflix is a streaming service, but they had a lot of wrestling DVDs on
Yeah.
Netflix. And so when I first got a Netflix account, which was when I was like 13 or 14, I just like immediately put the queue up with just like all these wrestling DVDs I got. Like I think like in like 2005 they came out with like a big DVD box set that was all like WrestleMania 1 through 20, like all the WrestleManias that had happened, and it was like this $200 box set that I think I wanted more than anything else when I was a kid, but it was just too expensive. I wasn't going to get it as a present. Um, and so but like I remember like one of the first things I did was just queue up all the WrestleManias and on Netflix, and then one by one they came to me and I watched them all. But that's like kind of what you had to do, and now it's just so ridiculous, and it's ridiculous with everything. It's ridiculous with like music, how easy it is to access music, how easy it is to access television, whole entire television series, and wrestling library is no different. Uh, but we're gonna talk about this Peacock transition. We're going back to Jason. We're going back to the Stone Ages with this, at least originally, because there was a lot of concern over the last, you know, basically since the Peacock deal was announced and the transition was announced. What was going to happen to the tape library on WWE Network? Would it be immediately available on Peacock? And there was, a couple of weeks of uncertainty. And the reality is now that it's not going to be immediately available on Peacock. And so WWE issued a press release earlier this week about what the transition is originally going to look like. And the first thing that was really interesting was that they're not going to do account migration. So they're not going to, if you have a WWE Network account, it's just going to be canceled. And the onus is on you, the user, to sign up for Peacock and get a separate Peacock account, which I think is just kind of like a bad strategy in general, because when you have a automatic renewing payment, you never give the consumer an opportunity to question why they're buying it or why they're
Hmm.
doing it. You just kind of let them passively renew it. But so that's the first one, and the second one is that the tape live, according to this press release, the WWE Network archive, what they're bringing over is almost nothing. So when you sign up for Peacock, whatever March 18th, the first day that's going to be on, what's in the WWE Network app goes kaput on April 4th. What they're going to have on the WWE Network is they're going to have the last year's worth of WWE pay-per-views. They're going to have like a few WWE recent like WWE like documentaries and series. They're going to have the Last Ride. They're going to have like some WWE Untold. Um, they're going to have like Total Bellas and that kind of stuff. But that's pretty much it. They're not going to have any pre 2020 WWE pay-per-views. They're not going to have any WCW, ECW pay-per-views. They're not going to have old things of Raw or SmackDown or Nitro. They're not going to have Hardcore TV. They're not going to have anything from the territory libraries. Nothing from, you know, Mid South Wrestling or World Class Championship Wrestling or the AWA or any of these. Nothing from Wrestling Classics. Nothing from basically anything before 2019. Uh, and so to me that's going to be really strange, because the WWE Network has made its bread and butter on being this enormous archive of wrestling history, and it's there to not have that immediately set up. And they eventually feel like they're going to move them over, but they just said kind of vaguely, "Oh, we're going to think that they're going to be around before sometime, around SummerSlam," and it's like, okay, well, that doesn't give me a ton of confidence that this stuff's going to get over. What do you kind of make out of just like now that we're going to go through, at least for a few months, it seems, this period where all this archive stuff is not going to be available?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because um, that was the big appeal for me when I bought the network was watching the old territory stuff because obviously like that stuff wasn't readily available, like just anywhere. It was really, and you could have it like all in order as well. Especially now, like you can watch all the shows in order of how they were, and you can just
Mm-hmm.
you pretend you're watching it in real time. But now, I guess it just depends what. Peacock or like NBC, whichever executive feels like how they want to roll this out and what they think the appeal of the WWE Network is. Maybe they just feel it's for the current content. Maybe I'm just we're speaking in the executive perspective. I don't agree with this, but just still, maybe they think that like releasing all this current and new content is what's going to be the appeal of the WWE Network for Peacock, not really just going back and watch all the old Raws or SmackDowns or even WCW stuff. And maybe it could be a of a new censorship policy for Peacock. Not really just in terms of like the disclaimers that we puts up. Just in that maybe there's a different way Peacock wants to do that. Nothing really. I don't know if anything's actually gonna be taken out for anything, but just more of how Peacock and NBC Universal wants to do disclaimers on the WWE Network. Maybe that's a change in policy in that. Maybe, but other than that, I can't really see any other reason why. Just either maybe just a technology thing. That's the only a reasonable explanation why they can't do account migrations and why they can't put everything on the tape library right away on the day one.
Yeah, my understanding is that this has to be a technology issue because it's such a like a obvious bad practice to both have the double whammy of no account migration, so people are going to be like, okay, I guess I got to sign up for Peacock. Like, let me take out my credit card and put it and type it in. Where you're going to get some people who are like, you know what, I didn't really use WWE Network as much as I thought I would. I'm going to cut this. I'm looking to cut down my expenses on streaming services. And then the double whammy of having that, and then also being like, oh yeah, by the way, none of the old stuff is available. And you do have like I just anecdotally have talked to people who are like, wait, none of the archives? Like I don't care about the modern stuff. I only watch the old stuff anyway. I'm not gonna sign up. And so I have to think it's a technology issue. It's baby bad practice because why would you not even have like the I can understand I can you can sell me on the idea of like you can't have like old Mid-South wrestling on there with like stuff that is not politically correct at all for a million different reasons. And I've heard that thought of as like, oh, Peacock is someone's gonna, tweet out, I can't believe you have this disgusting stuff on Peacock, and it's, I don't know, anything basically going on in Mid-South, basically anything that would happen in a Southern wrestling promotion from, 1950 to 1990, and then and probably even beyond that. But what's the excuse for not having like every WrestleMania or like WrestleMania from like 2 years ago? Because
Right.
by this press release, that's not going to be on it. So my guess is that they just don't have enough stuff. So like, okay, what is the minimal stuff we want? We can put on like we can put on the last year pay-per-views, and we can put on some of our television series that probably I don't know don't take up that much time. So it's weird. Also, like who watches the last year's worth of pay-per-view events?
Um, so someone out there must be, I guess, if they feel the need to put that on.
Yeah, like I understand the like oh yeah we'll just put the last years on because that I can understand the logic behind if you have a limited amount of stuff you can transfer over right away. You just do let's do the last year's worth of pay-per-view. That does kind of make sense, but from a viewership standpoint, I'd be like, okay, like I'd much rather than put like every WrestleMania on than like like Backlash from last year in the COVID-19 era of wrestling.
Yeah,
Like I don't
exactly.
know, I don't really know anyone who's like watching pay-per-views that happened like 4 months ago, unless they were like amazing, which they're not because they were in either in the Thunderdome or they were in the Performance Center. It's not like the glory period of wrestling you'd want to showcase. So that's kind of weird to me. And I mean, I'm still like I'm not gonna like obviously I'm not gonna. First of all, both you and I we talked about this off air. Both you and I are already Peacock subscribers
Mhm.
because we're both Premier League fans. So we're I'm not I'm like yeah whatever. I don't have to sign up for anything new. I'm just saving $5 a month that I wasn't given to the WWE Network. So I'm cool with it from that end. And obviously, I still want to watch the new pay per views and keeping up with the current product. But you raised a really interesting point, Jason. I didn't think about that. Like Peacock maybe thinks we got to show live sports. That's what we care about. We don't care about. I mean, and they are going to get the archives over, but they do are probably thinking that the live stuff is what's going to draw viewers, and that's probably is the right assumption. I think you would give like if you were to ask the 1.1 million U.S. subscribers, like to give a choice. You can either only watch the old stuff and never, or only watch stuff that's live. Most people would say, well, even though I like the old stuff, I'd rather watch the current product. A majority, some would say, I don't care about the new stuff. Let me watch the old stuff. But yeah, that's an interesting point about like, this is about showcasing live WWE content, not stuff from the past. But I do think that I don't think they're gonna like, I don't know what number to expect if they had 1.1 million WWE Network subscribers in the US. I don't know like what percentage of that number is going to end up signing up for Peacock, and because I think it's going to be probably under a million people, perhaps much more. I don't really know how to gauge that.
Yeah. Yeah, and plus also, Cox subscribers, they automatically get Peacock, but like what percentage of those people are also subscribed to the
Well,
network?
Comcast, all Comcast subscribers, and that's 20 million. Like, I think that was 20 million households in America.
Right.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like,
But
even
then percentage of that is like network subscribers.
yeah, like you and I are already, we're both WWE Network and Peacock subscribers, so like we're not going to be factored into that number moving over. I'm sure there's other people like that. I think there was something like, there was like 20 million people who had Peacock subscriptions, or had signed up for Peacock, and those include people who were Comcast subscribers who were probably WWE Network subscribers. They were like, oh wait, I can get this thing for free, and now I don't have to pay. Yeah, I'll sign up. So, and that's getting beyond just like the kind of elements of not having uh, the network available. But um, kind of circling back to kind of original about like what the WWE Network was like having as a fan. Um, like what I guess what was your kind of favorite thing about the WWE Network and like having access to it?
Yeah, it was just like I said before, just watching that old content that like, that wasn't always readily available, because, it's just, just me just being, I just wanted to have that full context of being a wrestling fan. You want to know, oh, what happened before, from all 70s and 80s that you didn't get to watch all the time, and so that's a big appeal to me. Some of the documentary stuff, I initially I was excited for that because that was obviously a marketing point of original content, but it never lived up to its expectations, except for as of late, the Last Ride documentary was really a step up into previous, WWE documentaries. But even then, like, a lot of them was just, people in character, or even then, just your basic sort of documentaries, and it never lived up to its potential that I really was hoping. Because I like documentaries, but it never lived up to its potential for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, the documentary series, like, I remember the same thing. I remember like getting hyped. I'm like, oh, they're gonna have this whole series on the Monday Night Wars. That's gonna be great. And it's like you're really just getting like the sanitized WWE version of the Monday
Yeah.
Night Wars, where like, I don't need to repeat the same talking points, but they're, we know how WWE remembers that era, and how the same things get brought up and over again. But yeah, I would say like the real strengths were like the WWE 24 series and the Untold Stories, when they would just follow a talent around on like the day of
Hmm.
an event and they'd kind of go into their career. Those were like, to me, and they never satisfyingly followed up with any of them like on on the canon show, like on Raw SmackDown. But those are always like the best ways to get talent over, which were to show them like be doing their or them in their real life, and what it's like for them, going backstage, what it's like for them to perform. They had this challenge that they had to overcome. Almost every single one they do is good, and almost every single one they do makes me think more of the talent and more interested in seeing the talents. Like, but they never followed up. That stuff was never mentioned really on Raw or SmackDown. It never really played into their characters, and that's kind of a holistic WWE problem where, uh, like anything that doesn't happen on Raw or SmackDown, like basically ends up not existing, even if it's good. Like anything that happens on The Bump or Raw Talk or Talking Smack or these WWE 24 documentaries, or so much, or something that's like a WWE.com exclusive, even no matter how good they are, they're like not they're like they're not like a serious, they're never brought up on the show. Like, how many times have we seen I know
Hmm.
Peyton Royce is the latest one. How many times have we seen the awesome WWE post show promo that everyone talks about and then is never followed up on? It happens all the time, and I think that's kind of a symptom of how the creative approach to the company, or what the creative approach to the company is. But I always thought from like the WWE 24 series and that kind of thing, they had done so much good work establishing these people as people that I want to root for, and then they never really acknowledged it on like the actual scripted show.
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the only one that really got followed up on was The Miz, his infamous Talkie Smack promo. That was
Hmm.
the only one that got really followed up on. But yeah, like even recently, Peyton Royce, Mustafa Ali, he's done a lot of stuff on Raw Talk, but that's never been brought up.
No.
Like you get more truth on Raw Talk, but still, you get enough R-Truth, and his shenanigans on Raw, so that doesn't really, mean much there. And so yeah, like, I think it's just classic thing of just how big WWE is. Like, you have your production people who, are told to work on this stuff and they do a good job on that. But then you have another side with big man, the creative stuff where they're not really beholden happens on the WWE network, which is like a weird sort of thing. It's like, you would think there would be, more synergy between there, but there never was. And maybe that's why, like, I remember reading how in 2014, the goal was 1 million subscribers, but then after that, like they haven't really gotten a huge gain of subscribers, and maybe that's sort of why, because there's never any synergy between the network and the WTV, especially since like back then the big selling point of the network, other than the pay-per-views and stuff, was NXT. Like NXT only available on the network, and that was the only way you could watch NXT, and that was a big selling point. But even then, like it's still a problem now, where NXT still feels like another world. It's again lives in another galaxy in some respects towards the main roster.
Yeah, well, you raise a couple interesting points right there. Um, yeah, well, for starters, the network as a business model um, was not a success. I mean, you can look at any way you want. You said 1 million. 1 million, I think, was like their original goal, like within a 6 months or something like that. The original numbers tossed around for the network were like 3 and 4 million American subscribers, and they never came close. They never came close. I mean, the idea was, I mean, logically, the idea makes sense. We have 4 million people watching Raw every week. All we just need those people to want to spend $10 each month on the WWE Network. It's a total steal with the pay-per-views, all that kind of stuff like that. But they were never able to convert those all of those weekly viewers into customers of the network. And there are different issues with that. When the network first came out, streaming services were not as ubiquitous as they are now. It wasn't like everyone had a Roku or Amazon Fire or Chromecast that could easily get it on their TV. It was like you had to have like a PlayStation or something to run it, or you could watch it on your computer. Uh, and they were never able to get that number. So that from that end, it was a failure. You can look at they. I think the network, if you look at like the annual reports, the network they do make a profit off of the network, but it hadn't been enough of a profit to offset the original costs that were associated with starting up the network, because it was very expensive to start up, and they never made enough profit in the following years to really make up for that. There's also Brandon Thurston over at WrestleNomics, who covers this stuff better than anyone, did a real big breakdown yesterday on kind of the financial elements of the WWE Network. He talked about how one of the key things was that WWE priced itself as entertainment. So that $9.99 a month figure is similar to what you'd pay for Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus, or these entertainment streaming services. But compared to sports, like if you wanted to get NFL Sunday Ticket or MLB.TV or NBA League Pass, like you're paying for those prices. I think it's like, I think the NFL Sunday Ticket's like $60 or $70 a month.
Mm-hmm.
I think the NBA and baseball are like around $30 or $40 a month. And so if WWE saw itself as sports, they could have charged that much, and they would have, with the people, with the archive and everything, I think they would have been able to keep a decent amount of their viewers. So they didn't price themselves appropriately. And I know that again, I'm giving full credit here to Brandon Thurston, but he kind of did an evaluation of how well he thinks that different pay-per-views would have done if the network didn't exist, if you could only buy them through pay-per-view. And he said, they would have made more money off of pay-per-view. They would have made way more money. I mean, they gave WrestleMania away for free on the network almost every year as a gimmick, so they could say, oh, the day after WrestleMania, oh, we have 1.7 million subscribers, and it's like, well, 400,000 of those people are people who signed up for WrestleMania for free and are not paying. But in the old days, they could have, people would have paid $60 or $70 for WrestleMania because they did in the past. the people would pay. You got 1 million people to buy WrestleMania, 23 or for that price point. So there's no reason. So the network never worked out financially the way WWE wanted to until now, when they were able to cut a big deal for basically selling their contents to Peacock. And that's a big part of this, was that Peacock is willing to pay a lot of money for content just because they feel like they're in a streaming war. They need to get more people subscribing to the service, and they're willing to overpay for something like WWE. And now they're going to make $200 million a year doing nothing, just doing what they were doing before, and not dealing with the same kind of costs that came with running the network. So it's really interesting. I think some people think the network was like a huge financial success, and it really wasn't.
It was a success for fans, not
Oh,
financial.
hell yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's where people come from it. But like from a business perspective, for WWE standpoint, yeah, it wasn't a success. Even for the wrestlers themselves, like like normally,
Yes.
wrestlers, they get a pay cut from how the pay-per-view buy do, but then for the network, it was a bit shady of like how the payouts actually worked. So like they didn't get a cut from subscribers. Like I think I was reading, I tried to research this from like how Netflix or other services pay like actors for like how their shows go on, and then I think The Office and the Friends, cast, like every time like their stuff is on a streaming service, they get like 2% of payout. And so, like, imagine that for like the WWE talent themselves. Like, it's really not a lot that they're getting out of it. But yeah, obviously, I think people more look at it from a fan's perspective, where it was a big win for the fans. But yeah, for WWE, like, yeah, the big thing is content, and the content they're providing is more just the same all the time. Like, yeah, your WWE 24 documentaries, but it was always a new 24. It wasn't like a new show. They tried to JBL. He had his whole documentary in series, which was good, but like it wasn't a big selling point for a lot of people. Even Legends House, we mentioned before, it was like a weird reality show that like, it was fun for what it was, but still wasn't like, oh, hey, we want to watch Roddy Piper and everyone else live in the same house. It's like, not really. No, I don't really want to pay for that. It's not really a big selling point. So it was kind of weird, the content that they would provide, other than like NXT, of course.
Yeah, well, they would kind of go through phases, like where you would see, like, oh, they're and I remember reading the Observer at the time, and they'd say, like, they're making a big push to add more original programming to the network, and that's when you saw things like Mick Foley had a show, Holy Foley. You had different incarnations of the Diva shows. I know those are, some of them were on E. You had I think Corey Graves had a whole show where he just talked to guys about tattoos. You had Legends House, obviously. They had WWE Top 10, which is like a countdown kind of series where they do like top 10 finishing moves, top 10 this, top 10 that. They had the Monday Night Wars, docu-series. They had like WWE Chronicle. They had also, they would experiment with stuff. And then they would, I'd read in the Observer like the following year. It's like they're cutting all that stuff. There's no more shows, and you would say like there's no more original programming. Suddenly, Holy Foley doesn't get another wasn't there a Jerry Springer show on WWE Network where like I think they had a prank show maybe. Maybe those are two different shows.
Edge and Christian show, I know they had. It's like they did like crazy skits, but I don't remember a prank show.
I doubt they had like a show that was like it was basically like punked. It might have even been called like pranked, but the idea was that it would basically be just televising ribs from backstage. Right. Let me see if I can find that real quick, because that's on my book.
Yeah, I don't really remember that, but yeah, they had the Edge and Christian show. That was a big thing.
They had Camp WWE, like the Seth Green animated show.
Yeah, that was an animated show, and yeah, like I guess that's just more appeal to kids. But then that's just more convincing parents to subscribe rather than just getting the kids to convince their parents to subscribe or anything like that. But like, yeah, there's weird little shows here and there.
WWE Swerved was the prank show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay. So, but yeah, they put original programming on there. I really honestly never watched it. I don't like in my personal, like, if you were to tell like 2008 Jesse like what the WWE Network was going to be, I'd be like, oh, I would only watch that. I would never watch any other television ever. By the time the network came out, I honestly ended up using it way less than I think I would have ever thought. I think by the time that the network came out, I had kind of already like stopped. I wasn't as interested in like the Attitude Era or like these previous eras of WWE or even WCW. like that I had been in the past. Like I was getting more into watching like Japanese wrestling and older Japanese wrestling. That was like the new stuff to me and independent wrestling. It wasn't so that's where like I was expending a lot of my time watching stuff. I wasn't like huge on like just going back and watching old pay-per-views, which I was probably like 2010, 2011 when I was getting, going hunting for DVDs. But what I loved about the network was even though they never had actually a very good or usable search tool, I always loved just going back and finding um, like just random matches because what would happen is I'd get in my head like I want to see some matches from some guy who I wanted to see like I want to see some Lance Storm matches, and you would just type it in, and again the search tool wasn't great, but you'd be able to find like, oh, here's like this random like Lance Storm, Eddie Guerrero match from Nitro, or random like random Thunder in like 1998, like let's turn that on. Or Lance Storm versus Chris Jericho from 1995 ECW. You just find stuff like that, and that was what was really interesting to me because you'd come across kind of different kind of gems that you wouldn't have seen, otherwise. And if you were just looking for like the big stuff, which I felt like I had already mostly seen. And very recently, like probably in the last few months, I kind of started watching like stuff that I had actually seen before, which I really didn't use on the network that much. I started watching stuff from like 2014 and 2013, that kind of era, like a lot of like the Shield kind of era stuff, because enough time had gone by where I had actually kind of forgotten like what that was like. Like
Mm.
I was watching the 2000 and I want to say it was 2013 Royal Rumble. No, 2012, maybe 2012 Royal Rumble. It was a Rumble that John Cena won to face The Rock at WrestleMania 28. Or no, I'm sorry, WrestleMania 29. So it would have been like the second time. But I can't remember specifically what year that was. But anyway, the final two was John Cena and Ryback, and like Ryback was like crazy over. Like
Yeah.
I forgot, like I just thought like, yeah, he's this big muscle guy, got to push, and then flamed out, like whatever. Like when I was like watching that, I'm like the crowd is going like fucking crazy for him. I know it's like part of it's like the Rumble, and he's wrestling Cena, who was like, people didn't want to see Cena win again. He's just like doing feed me more, and he, like, the entire 18,000 people like, feed me more. I'm like, oh man, that was a great catchphrase. Like that was so easy for everyone to chant. Like this is so perfect. And then he lost. But it was just kind of that stuff that I had totally like kind of forgotten about, and I was kind of rediscovering. And I'm sure many people, especially older people, will have had that experience many, many times on the network because they remember seeing more wrestling live than I will because they've been watching it for much longer. But it was kind of interesting, and I do hope that they get that stuff up relatively soon because while I wasn't a regular viewer, it was definitely something that I still liked having access to.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, when WWE started gaining more libraries from other promotions, like Progress or Evolve, it's kind
Mhm.
of interesting how they marketed, guys like Drew McIntyre. It's like, hey, check out his stuff in Evolve. Look at Johnny Gargano, his stuff. Oh, back when he was in working in the Indies, like that was always an interesting way to market stuff. But obviously, that's sort of WWE trying to address other wrestling promotions, which they always do. And then even stuff like with Ryback, it would be cool to see the market, sort of things like, oh, hey, remember, during this time you could check it out on the network, but then they would have to acknowledge, X WWE or even people they don't have a good relationship with. And so that was always a weird, sort of thing there. But yeah, going back and watching those things was always fun to check out, a time when like, oh, this is a weird time in WWE because it really shows how things change over the years. Even like, yeah, like you said, like 2013, whatever, even like, 9 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the time goes by. Like I was thinking, like, wow, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't need to watch that because I remember that happening. I'm like, you know what? How much wrestling have I watched since between 2014 and now? Like thousands and thousands of hours worth. So I'm not going to. So I'm like, it actually is going to be kind of cool to go back and see it and like remember when like the crowd just had much more energy. I know people talk about like. And obviously, those crowds don't have any energy right now. But people talk about the Attitude Era and like the pops that they got back then, which obviously was very big and the crowd was always hot. But like even up until like the mid 2000s, the crowd was always really hot. And now I feel like the last few years, you just compare that to like what we see now. It just does feel like the crowd. There's very few people that are over to the level that they were like 5 years ago. Like the people who are over now that as like top stars, like it's not even close to like and that comes back to like WWE booking and not having an emotional investment in talent. But I don't want to get too far down that route. One thing I think is really important to talk about is how the network changed um, how the WWE could produce its content, and also how it changed the model of pay-per-views and how that impacted booking. You kind of touched on it from a financial side earlier about like, WWE used to get if you were in the main event of a pay-per-view and that pay-per-view did X amount of buys, you would get a bonus based on how many buys was. And the incentive was work hard, promote this thing like hell, and do well, and you will get more money. And it used to be so easy to analyze what did well and what did not. If a pay-per-view did this amount of buys one year and then the next year did this, you could say, well, that person didn't draw as a main eventer. That main event wasn't good. People were not interested in that storyline. It was so easy for us to analyze that. With the network, totally different business model. Many people are just passively renewing each month. And if pay-per-view sucks one month, then some people might cancel if it's really bad, but most people are just gonna be like, I'll just wait for the next month again. And so as long as WWE produced a pay-per-view that was good every 3 or 4 months, I feel like it didn't really like change their business at all, as opposed to in the past. And I think that led to a lot of booking changes. I think that would we have had 5 years of them pushing Roman Reigns as the top babyface if every pay-per-view he was on didn't do that well? No, because they wouldn't be able to financially sustain that kind of push, because they'd have to say like, look, we got to do something else that's going to draw. Having everyone just passively renew the network, it doesn't matter. I believe that like you couldn't have built multiple pay-per-views around Jinder Mahal, WWE champion, in a pre-network era, because people didn't buy him as a champion and people weren't interested in seeing him in the main event. And I think those pay-per-views he was on would have done really bad had they not been on the network. And since they're on the network, people are like, I don't care. I might not watch this show. I'm not interested in Jinder Mahal, but since I am interested in, what's going to happen at SummerSlam or Survivor Series or whatever's coming up, I'm not going to just cancel because of it. I do think that it's totally changed the way both how we can, analyze the business and see, what programs and what wrestlers are drawing well up top, and also just how WWE doesn't have to commit to presenting something that everyone wants to see each month.
Yeah, for sure. And, even being on the pre-show, like that was a big hit financially towards you as a worker, because you probably wouldn't get that same payday as, people who are actually on the card as well. And even the frequency of pay-per-views have changed as well. There's a pay-per-view literally every month now in WWE, where before it wasn't always like that, was always every couple months you would get a pay-per-view. But now, like, after your Elimination Chamber, there's Fastlane this month. After Fastlane, of course, WrestleMania. Then after that, whatever pay-per-view they're gonna do after WrestleMania. But like, there's always a new pay-per-view each month. And again, for the fans, there's no financial incentive to worry about new pay-per-view every month, because you're just paying like the $9.99. It's no extra cost towards you. But for WWE booking, how it influences that, you don't have time to build, you're building stories in different ways, building to a new pay-per-view each month. Every match has to feel like a bigger match each and every month, rather than, I guess use AEW as an example, with the way they do pay-per-view models. After Full Gear, they had a couple months until the Revolution to build onto a bigger show, and then you had your extra special Dynamite, each and every week, because AEW still relies on that old pay-per-view model there. And for them, they can have that conversation of like, okay, what drew Revolution? Because it sounds like gonna do big in buys. What drew it? Was it Sting? Was it the barbed wire match? You can have conversation around that, like you're talking about how you can talk about who's drawing and who's not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad AEW has this pay-per-view model, so it's easy to look at. Look, every AEW pay-per-view has done about 100,000 buys, give or take. Mm-hmm. We don't have any reports yet on the number. I did see a lot of analysis that there's a belief that this pay-per-view AEW Revolution is going to be the 120,000 buys or something like that. So it's going to do noticeably better than the previous ones. We as analysts can say, okay, clearly what they did for Revolution, and I think it definitely comes down to the barbed wire match and then maybe Sting's match. like those worked. Those worked at a level that they previously have done better than other angles that have gone into it. And we can say, okay, we can crap on the barbed wire match, and I was hugely disappointed by it, as I'm sure almost everyone was. But we can say, you know what, it drew. People were interested in it, and you can't, it worked. It worked. They built a match around a gimmick, and even though the gimmick under-delivered in the end, it did work because they did draw a lot of interest. And that's easy for us to analyze. We have no idea. Like, for all I know, Jinder Mahal would have sold 500,000 pay-per-views if he, if he was on there. But we simply don't know that. But yeah, it's definitely changed. And look, Fastlane, we got Fastlane. So we've got one more episode of SmackDown to go, tomorrow's episode. Then we have a go-home show for Raw and a go-home show for SmackDown. So we've got 3 episodes of television left. Fastlane has 2 matches announced.
Mm-hmm.
And that's common. Like, if they were trying to sell a pay-per-view, a big pay-per-view, they would probably have had to announce matches previous in advance. They'd have to put more effort into building different feuds to hype up the shows. And like the same way, like you look at the AEW, and it's easier for AEW because they only have 4 pay-per-views. But you look at that Revolution card, and pretty much every match had about a month's worth of build. The Adam Page and Matt Hardy match had a long build. The Chris Jericho MJF and Young Bucks match had a long build. Miro and Kip Sabian versus the Best Friends probably had too long of a build because that feud's been going on for like 8 months. Omega and Moxley are really long builds. And then you did have like the ladder match and the tag team battle royale, which didn't have that long of a build. But you look at it and it's like, okay, they clearly took a lot of time. The women's elimination tournament, if you count that as a build, which I do, like that, was again like a month's worth of build. They just, because they got a lot more at stake, because they got to sell people on that pay-per-view. And since WWE has made $10 basically the default price for pay-per-views, you're going to try to get people to spend like 5 times as much money for that one show than you would for a month's worth of the WWE Network, which usually includes a pay-per-view, sometimes 2. So it's totally changed the way I think people see the business in just a bunch of different ways.
Well, even look at NXT, even them, they sort of rely on, they don't have a pay-per-view every month, but the NXT takeovers are infrequent, but still, like with the network, you don't really know what's drawing people to takeovers. I think everyone comes out of a takeover thinking it's good, but we don't really know what draws people into a takeover. That's the big issue there. Like, is Io Shirai a draw as a champion? Is Finn Balor, his run as champ, is he a draw for people? I think people acknowledge after the show that, hey, that Io Shirai match was really good. That Finn Balor match is really good. He's having a really good run as champion. Well, is he? We're not really seeing anything because the network subscribers, they kind of just reign stagnant just for no matter what happens in WWE programming, even with very infrequent takeovers. I think they're having more each and every year, but still it's pretty infrequent. But we don't really know what's drawing them for fans.
Yeah, and it's become really it's become difficult to assess. And look, sometimes stuff that ends up being really bad does actually draw, and stuff that we think is really good doesn't actually draw, because it all comes down to a matter of opinion and interest. In the barbed wire match, people would say it was a complete disaster for AEW, but it probably looks like it's probably going to end up being a pretty big draw. The Miz and Bobby Lashley whole thing that went down on Raw a few weeks ago, where they kept delaying the match, like that was terrible television, for me to watch. But it ended up drawing people, ended up being interested in it. So it is difficult. NXT is interesting because you're right, for fans. NXT was a big drawing point on the network. The show was exclusively on the network, and it was like the home of NXT. And then once NXT went to television, it did probably change people's interests. Like, okay, why do I have to watch? Well, 2 things happened. First was some people were like, okay, now I don't have to watch the network every week to watch NXT because I'm going to watch it live, or I can DVR it if I'm doing something else or watching Dynamite. And the second thing was that the NXT just changed. They used to be on the network. They used to be pretty conservative about what they put out as far as big matches on just regular NXT. You didn't see a lot of title defenses. You would see, I think the show was only an hour. You might not see, the Undisputed Era or, Sami Zayn or Shinsuke Nakamura or whoever was a champion at the time. You might not see them every week. when it's on USA, NXT is completely different. It's a different show. Obviously you see the big names every week. They give away title matches left and right. They're trying to get viewers for USA. They're in a wrestling war. Uh, all that kind of stuff is happening. So the show is just completely different. But yeah, I think I think the WWE Network was great for hardcore fans that wanted to watch NXT or old wrestling. Um, but at the same time, it also, because it changed the way how WWE approached its business, um, you could say that like it wasn't always a positive. Even though I enjoyed having being able to watch every old pay per view at the touch of my fingers, even though I enjoyed that aspect, I would also say like what, I kind of wish we could go back to a time where there was more consequences for WWE putting out a bad product and for WWE for turning off viewers. And unfortunately, we live in an era where that doesn't really exist.
I mean, yeah, for sure. Like when Goldberg beat the Fiend, in those kind of moments, people would, cancel WWE Network would trend on Twitter, but that never really amounted to anything. I think they would see a dip, but it wasn't significant enough to would react to it.
Well, the WWE now. At the end of the day, the reason the network wasn't as successful as it could have been was because the last few, during the WWE Network era, WWE's product has sucked, and they have experienced a large decline in their fan base.
Mm-hmm.
If the product was hot, and Raw was, people were tuning into Raw, and I get people don't tune into cable at the same rate, so maybe you wouldn't still have 5 million people watching Raw, but there's no, people have streaming services now more than ever. They'd be more inclined to get WWE Network now than they were a few years ago. And so the whole idea, like, if WWE's current product was still hot, then they would have. There was no reason why they shouldn't have gotten 3 million subscribers or whatever their target goal was. But the problem was the product wasn't hot, and the product was, they continued to make mistakes, and they continued to push people incorrectly, and they never came up with the kind of star that connected with the audience in a way that would drive that kind of revenue the way they had in the past. They came up with Steve Austin. Steve Austin sold a bunch of pay-per-views. They came up with Hulk Hogan and John Cena and The Rock and all these people that did end up having a big draw. They haven't had the person that was going to sell all the network subscriptions. That person, they haven't come up with that person, and ultimately that's why the network was probably a failure, was because watching the old stuff and having that option was only interesting to a certain controlled group of people, and the modern current product was not good enough to entice new people to sign up. And like, I think, I can probably pull up the numbers in a second, but I believe the WWE Network subscriptions have actually gone down slightly over the years. Like, I think they might have peaked in like 2018, and they're gone down now. And they're not down by that much. And if you look at like, okay, well, the viewership for Raw in 2018 was 3.7 million, and now it's 1.9 million or whatever. You would look at the network drop and be like, oh, that's not that big of a drop. But the trend in these streaming services is that your numbers should never go down. Like, Netflix number just goes up, Hulu up. I don't know, I should stop doing that hand signal, but all these different, if you look at streaming, like, people are just getting more invested in streaming now. Like, people are getting more invested in, obviously in the last 365 days with the pandemic, people have gone way more into streaming, and you're seeing everyone has to have a streaming service now. And so those numbers you really have no excuse for your numbers to go down or even remain flat over, the last few years. But the fact is WWE's burned away viewers. And I don't think, and that's ultimately why the network didn't work out, because if they had 4 million subscribers or they had 5 million subscribers, they're not selling their content to Peacock for $200 million a year. They'd be either selling it for a lot more or not selling it at all, because they believe that they would, it's eventually going to make them a lot of money. I think selling the product to Peacock and selling the network content to Peacock was essentially WWE punting on the idea that it would ever become popular enough for it to turn that kind of profit.
And really, all it takes one big thing. These other streaming services like Netflix, they have like one big show that everyone wants to watch, like Stranger Things. That was like one big popular show.
Yeah, they have
Peacock,
a few more, but
that's what I mean. Like, yeah, you need one big thing. You have everything else, but you need one big thing to attract viewers. Peacock, they had The Office. That was the big. That was like the only thing people talked about with Peacock. Like, they have a bunch of other stuff, but like you can rewatch The Office anytime you want, and and so on and so forth. You only need one big thing to really draw people into your service, and then they can check everything else out. But WWE, they never had that one big thing that you really need to watch. I mean, NXT could have been that, but like it peaked at some point with WWE on the network, NXT on the network, I should say. It peaked at some point where like they're never gonna draw more viewers in. They have a hardcore audience, and that's all they really have.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a good point. I think The Mandalorian is a good example of just like, okay, they had this very, very successful big show that got people originally invested in the streaming service. If you were to look at Netflix's early, like the first kind of shows that because I'm an old, I go way, as I already mentioned in this podcast, I go way back with Netflix. When I first got Netflix, you could watch stuff online, but it wasn't like big. Like they had some like old, like classic classic movies kind of style movies available. They maybe had like one or a few recent releases, but it was all movies. There was no TV shows or anything like that. And Netflix has since kind of morphed into being this thing where you get a big TV series that everyone wants to watch on Netflix. And I believe the first one they ever released, which was House of Cards, which ended up being pretty popular, very well received show. And then they followed that up pretty immediately. I'd have to get the timeline with they had Orange is the New Black. They had, I'm trying to think what other big Netflix shows came out during that time period. Black Mirror, I know came out probably a few years after Orange is the New Black. They just now they have like a bazillion different TV shows, but they got that big thing. And you're right, we can look at the WWE streaming service and say they never had that big angle. They never had that big star that really got people invigorated in the product and be like, I have to see what happens. I'm going to plunk down my $10. And that goes back to, just the general problem of not having a product that is kind of turning off viewers. And this switch to Peacock, I mean, you're just dangling that in front of them where people are going to be like, you know what, maybe I don't need the WWE Network. Maybe I don't I don't really care about, what's happening at WrestleMania. I don't care about it not these shows that aren't happening in front of fans. WrestleMania is going to happen in front of fans, but you know what I mean? I do think that they're going to lose more people, and it's going to put them in a difficult spot as far as, the thing is, we'll never know because you can't just look at the Peacock numbers, subscriber number, and say like, oh, there are the WWE fans, and like, oh, there, this many came over and those don't. We're going to have even less information on who's a draw. We're going to have less information on who what angles have worked because the popularity of WWE is just going to be swallowed up by the overall success or failure of Peacock as a whole, which is going to contain a lot of different things outside of wrestling.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that goes for all the streaming services where like the view count for all their content is pretty it's pretty private for the most part. Like some insiders, they have their sources that can tell them like, oh, this Netflix show this has this many views or whatever, but still we don't really know like the full deep. It's not like YouTube where you can see like, oh, that YouTube clip that got like 10 million views, but like for everything else, even the net stuff, like we never really knew how many people are watching a certain pay-per-view. We can only just assume just from like social media buzz of like how popular a show really is, but even then that's just just all algorithms and everything else on for that. So it's a pretty debated.
I think that like the best indicator I've heard from like what attributes like actual purchasing power and what in success outside of social media buzz is Google search numbers. And I know like Dave Meltzer uses that. I know Brandon Thurston uses like Google search numbers as kind of like, oh, this was trending, in the Google top 20. That means it was really successful because nothing ever trends that high. Social media buzz to me almost means nothing. Like, if you were to, again, look at the AEW show, like social media was buzzing about the failure of the explosion, but that wasn't like a positive thing for AEW or, there's a lot of elements to that. A lot of times people start complaining. Complaining actually is the best way to get something trending on Twitter. So you can't always look at social media buzz, but yeah, you're right about, we never really knew, I believe Dave Meltzer would publish like, what are the top 10 most watched shows on the WWE Network each week, but they were never really that informative because they were always what you expected. Like number 1 was the pay-per-view that was that week. Number 2 was the new WWE 24 that came out. Number 3 was NXT. Number 4 was this special on Monday Night Raw. Like it was always stuff that you would kind of figure. Occasionally, what would happen is you would see like a random pay-per-view pop up like, oh, Survivor Series 1992 came up. Why did that? And you would, to bring us to probably our final point here, was the reason that that would pop up was because I think like Bruce Pritchard would be talking about it on his podcast that week. So a lot of people would be watching it. And the WWE Network, because it made the archive so accessible to so many people, has kind of created like this cottage industry of podcasts and wrestling retrospective series and look backs where people talk about these kind of shows that you can now all watch. Like, yeah, we're gonna watch. I know the Voice of Wrestling. They just came up with an idea. Like they watched all of the like pre 2000 Joshi matches in WWF. So they watched like the Jumping Bob Angels and when Bull Nakano came over and wrestled Lunger Blaze and that kind of stuff. And like that's something you could only do on the network because it would be so. I mean, I guess you could probably torrent that kind of stuff. You could find that stuff somewhere. But like you couldn't assemble those through DVDs. They're obscure matches, and that's just one example. I know obviously Bruce Pritchard's very successful with his shows going over old pay-per-views. I know Eric Bischoff does a similar thing going over all the old Nitros. All of that stuff's going to be really hard to do without the network, because even if those people can assume the access to those old things and they can buy stuff or they work with the company so they can access it, the charm was that everyone could. It's like, okay, yeah, we're going to talk about Survivor Series 1992. Let me watch that. And everyone could. Until that stuff's on the network, it's going to be hard for these, all these different podcasts to survive. And I do think that's an interesting element because it's always good for WWE. Even if those people are not watching the current product, they're still invested in wrestling in some sort of way. And you're kind of turning away those people by taking away all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that just goes into like a big thing in like entertainment in general. Like you can see like the trending videos. It's like, oh, a musician reacts to this music video, or the stuntman reacts to all these stunts. And these podcasts, they became similar to that. Bruce Pritchard, longtime executive for WWE. Everyone wants to hear, oh, like what was Hulk Hogan thinking during that time? Like, oh, did Hulk Hogan really do that? And same for Eric Bischoff, like, oh, what was it like? Mark booking this show during that time, and they'll tell these stories that are very successful. And of course, Conrad Thompson, the through line at all these podcasts.
Yeah, Conrad.
Exactly.
He's going to be in trouble. I wonder what's going to happen. He's probably said something about it because it's obviously like his entire business appears to be doing this. But look, it's going to be a challenge for those guys, and obviously fans who are going to miss out. I know. I've heard people, they're like, yeah, the next month I'm just going to watch like as much of this stuff as I can because I know it's going to be gone. They're like, trying to do all this stuff before they go away to college or that kind of thing, because it's like I only got a month left to watch all these old Mid-South tapes because I don't know when I'm going to be able to watch them again. And I mean, I feel bad for people who have set out. I don't have any currently, but I know people have set out on goals like I'm going to watch every single, Raw from 1998 to 2000, and I want to watch them in order, and it's going to take me a while. And now it's like, well, you can't do that because all that stuff's being taken away. And like I said, I hope I assume eventually it will have to make it all over to Peacock. Mm-hmm. But we also have to see like how much does Peacock care about getting all that old stuff on there? Because the WWE Network, even the network itself, was often slow at uploading stuff. I mean, we're 8 years or whatever, or 7 years into the network's existence, and they're still like getting to, oh yeah, we finally got around to like these old wrestling challenge uploads. Let's upload those. I mean, it's taken them years and years to get them around. How long is it going to take to get all those uploads onto Peacock? It seems like it's going to take quite a while because they can't move a lot of stuff over at a time. And I think that's going to be a challenge, and I think that it's going to be a bummer to a lot of wrestling fans who were really interested in that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's probably why WWE, they're leading more like celebrities, because I think the one argument people have made for why Peacock is a good thing for WWE is that like, oh, an ad will pop up when someone's watching something else for WWE, and like you'll see it, Bad Bunny's on this show, and so that will help them towards watching more WWE. I think anecdotally that can work, but I guess in practice we'll see how effective that strategy can be. Whether that's a strategy they're going for or not, I mean that's just more like what other people are of, like that's executives what they're talking about.
Yeah. So here's the thing about that. About 2 years ago, when WWE moved over to Fox, all we heard about was how WWE being on Fox is going to lead to
Yeah.
the stock price went way up because people believed that it was going to lead to this big overall boom. Obviously, the show would be seen by a lot more people on Fox because it's a network show. Um, and the idea is that once people are seeing it on Fox, they're going to want to watch Raw. They're going to get the network. They're going to buy merchandise, and WWE is going to have this huge boom of all these new fans who are coming in. That never happened. A really
Yeah.
good recent example is that so I watched, like many people, I watched the NFC Championship game on Fox this year,
Hmm.
which was between the Buccaneers and the Packers, which I believe peaked at 54 million viewers. So outside of the Super Bowl, the most watched sporting television event of the year by far. On that show, because it was on Fox, or during the game for 3 hours, they relentlessly advertised SmackDown, 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 SmackDown. Couldn't have asked for more, better advertisement for SmackDown in front of a bigger audience. It literally was they pushed it a ton. And then so SmackDown rolled around on the following Friday, and it actually did less viewers than the previous week. So I'm kind of not really gung ho. I understand the mechanism is different on a streaming service because you might be watching The Office kind of lazily and oh, WWE, let me switch over to that. Obviously it's different than telling people to come back days later to watch this show, but I really kind of don't think that. I kind of reject this idea that there's this huge swath of the population that doesn't know what WWE is, but is a potential customer. I think most people at this point with the current product know what wrestling is and have chosen not to watch it or have no interest in ever watching it. If you had a really hot star or something like that, you could create new fans or bring people back. But as far as the current product, I just don't see simply being tied in with getting the word out there that exists is not going to bring a lot of new viewers.
Yeah, I mean that definitely goes into a whole different conversation of the perception of wrestling towards mainstream audiences and why the way people view wrestling, nowadays, and just a whole different conversation there. But yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
agree. Trying to get casuals in just blankly, just just say, hey, just watch our product. Don't give them a reason to watch the product. That's very difficult to do. And again, maybe like you said, maybe streaming is a different avenue towards that because I remember watching Fox games and football Fox games all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
just the way they would market WWE is just a short blurb for Michael Cole marketing SmackDown, and that was really it. There was nothing else that they did to market SmackDown for on Fox.
Yeah, you get a soulless Joe Buck
Yeah.
live read. Right? It's I remember someone saying, one of the funnier tweets I've ever seen was someone talking about Gary Lineker, the great English soccer, who's a big pundit on
Mhm.
I don't know who, Sky Sports, BBC. I don't know. I don't live in England, so I don't know what he is. But someone's just shared a clip of him reading a live read talking about Hell in a Cell this Saturday with The Fiend. Just totally, someone's Gary Lineker doing a soulless live read to see The Fiend, making it sound like he'd literally be doing anything else than wanting to watch that. It's just it's funny to us, but yeah, it's I don't know how good of a promotion is. Yeah, you're right. You'd be like, and yeah, Joe Buck would be during like a after I don't know a special teams play a punt, they'd be Joe Buck would be and now for a message from our friends over at WWE, and then Michael Cole, they'd be playing the "Are you ready?" and then
Yeah.
Michael Cole would be "Live from the Thunderdome," and I'd be okay, this it just sounds like Michael Cole has we should have talked about this on our last episode. Michael Cole has this ability to make everything sound super uncool. I don't know what it is about him, but just whenever he says whenever Sasha Banks comes out and he's "It's boss time," and I'm okay, I don't, part of it is him being a white man in his 50s saying
Sure.
that, but he just makes everything sound so uncool, and I don't know if you had I don't know. I'm not saying Byron Saxton or Corey Graves is the epitome of coolness either, but there's something about Michael Cole's delivery where I just anytime he has to say a catchphrase or anything, uh, it just makes it sound so unappealing and cool. And I think they should do a better job with those Fox reads. They basically just say the Thunderdome, Roman Reigns versus so and so, and it, to me doesn't tell you anything about why you should watch these guys. You just know that Roman Reigns is a big wrestling star, and that's pretty much it. Um, but that's kind of a different conversation about
Mhm.
everything. Got anything else to say on the network? R.I.P. Rest in peace.
Yeah, just RIP to the network. A, a very interesting legacy it leaves behind. Obviously, like we said before, positive for the fans, business wise, pretty mixed bag, and even for the wrestlers, a mixed bag as well. In terms of how they get paid, it just a whole thing. And I think that those problems will be even more elevated on a bigger platform and Peacock, with a bigger, company, NBC Universal, how they will deal with it. I think we talked about this off air. Seems like this rollout, it's probably not going to be great when it comes to Fastlane. It's a week away. They keep trying to market like, hey, this is gonna be on Peacock. It's gonna be on Peacock. But like, how much will that be for the fans? We'll have to wait and see and how everything plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I know people that have been really annoyed by Peacock, like when it comes to streaming live events. I know, like I said, watch the Premier League, and I have never had a problem like getting the game I wanted on Peacock.
Mm-hmm.
But I know people who are like, Peacock's not working, this stream's not working. Peacock, annoying aspect of Peacock is that you cannot watch stuff either like after it has already started or like on demand until like well after the game has ended. I know, like if I'm like if the I want to watch a soccer game at 1 o'clock and I show up at like 1:15, I can't just start from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You have to kind of start. You have to kind of watch it live or wait for the game to over and for you to know what happens and then watch it on demand. That's a big problem with WWE. A lot of people. I mean, I don't always watch pay-per-views live. I kind of I didn't now, but up until a few years ago, I had a job where like I would come home on Sunday nights at like 8:45, and like it was a kind of a routine once a month was I'd have to, I'd be 45 minutes behind, and I'd be on Twitter like tweeting things about that were happening like an hour after they already happened. So that's a big problem. I think that's something you're going to have to fix. Just in general, if you want to show more live events, you got to give people the flexibility to, watch stuff, go back and start from the beginning. And WWE Network wasn't great about that for a long time either. I think they improved that over the last year or so. But there was a long period of time where I would want to try to watch something from the beginning, and the WWE Network wouldn't let me.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. And again, there's all technology issues that we don't really know the behind the scenes about, but
Mm-hmm.
it's something they are going to get a lot of backlash for, I will say. But like because there's 100% going to be problems and people are going to voice their problems, and hopefully the customer service and all that stuff just gets going right away, because if they're unprepared for this, it's going to look really bad for everyone involved.
Yeah, especially because they're gambling here. I understand why they're doing it. So like Fastlane is going to be on the WWE Network and um, Peacock.
Yeah.
So that gives them, if like it just bombs on Peacock, like the stream doesn't work or whatever, people can at least go to WWE Network. They at least keep that kind of fail safe in. WrestleMania is going to be the first event, or maybe the Takeover will actually be the first event. We don't really have a great idea about the plans fully for WrestleMania weekend, but WrestleMania, the first night of WrestleMania is going to be the first night where it's only available on Peacock, and like you better hope that people can watch it because that's the event people are not gonna want to see screwed up. I wonder, if it will change how will they load up the first night at WrestleMania or second. I mean, WrestleMania, I think we have like 2 confirmed matches right now, so it's hard to tell what's actually going to be on that show. But it's going to be a big challenge, and like you said, they definitely better get it right because people are going to hear about it. They don't want wrestling fans getting after them. It'll be bad publicity for Peacock. But I think this has been a confusing time for we still don't know the actual ramifications of how long it's going to take them to like move the video archive over. So it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, do you have any final thoughts on the WWE Network?
Um, yeah, just that I'm sad that it's going to be gone. I'm sad. I'm not too happy about the video archives, even though I didn't use them probably as much as people would think, or as much as a lot of other people used. I'm happy that I'm going to save some money. I don't have to pay for the WWE Network. I can kind of morally absolve myself from giving Vince McMahon directly my money because I'm already a Peacock subscriber. So I can be like, oh yeah, I just have it for soccer. I'm not really giving him his money, the money if. So I'm getting off of underneath that burden, which is a little nice, but.
Mm-hmm.
I just, it's part of me thinks that the network was a little missed opportunity. I always felt like they could do more on it. I mean, like I said, the search bar function was never as good, and they never really put together compilations that worked really well. I always thought there was a better tool I think you could do this at one time. I don't know if you could still do it or if they improved it at all, because I think the one time I looked at it, it was so horrible that I didn't use it ever again. You used to be able to make like match um, like playlists similar to you
Right.
could set up like a playlist in like YouTube or Spotify. And because a part of it was because the search bar was so shitty that like it wasn't really good to just look up and string together random matches. But I would have loved like user created like to have like user created content, which I know like Netflix and stuff doesn't offer. But wouldn't it be interesting to like see like if someone like people would come up with creative ideas and it's like here are like the 15 like craziest blade jobs and just like there you just have like these crazy like this crazy like Dusty Rhodes match and then like a crazy ECW match and it's just people like totally gushing blood. Like I would like a something like that if someone took the time to put that together or like here's 20 matches where like the most botch filled matches or something like that. Like you would have there's a lot of creative stuff that you could have done with that access to the video archive that I don't think they ever really opened up to doing. Even things like I know like in his book, Chris Jericho, writing about his feud with Shawn Michaels in like 2008, 2009, and he said like, look, don't you think it'd be a good idea if someone just put together like all of the matches, all of the segments, all of the promos, and just put them in together, and you could watch like the entire feud, like just like on one like I don't know 2.5 hour video. I'd be like, yeah, I think that would be really interesting, and they never really got around to putting that kind of stuff together. But in the end, it changed the way we felt about wrestling and allowed me to watch more pay-per-views than I'd ever be able to watch without illegally streaming them. It changed the way WWE approached how it booked its shows, how it built, how resistant they could be to certain ideas. Uh, you know, it did put WWE kind of ahead of the game when it came to streaming service and offering that kind of. They were like I said when they said you're gonna watch this. It wasn't like Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus. All that stuff was not ubiquitous with our culture the way it is now, even though it wasn't that long ago. So there's a lot of good takeaways from it, and I'll be sad to see it goes. And I hope that Peacock, does a good job. I hope
Hmm.
it's relatively seamless. I hope they get that stuff that's not going to be on there right away up right away. I mean, the last thing I want to do is be sitting there on Sunday waiting for something to buff, waiting for something to load. So I'm not rooting for failure or anything like that. But yeah, it's a big takeaway.
Yeah, for sure, 100%.
Yeah. So that'll wrap things up. And we appreciate everyone who is listening. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell us what your favorite thoughts are on the WWE Network, what you're going to miss that's not going to be on there, what you enjoyed finding on there. And we'll be back again in 2 weeks. So take care.